това видео ще разгледам различните източни тактики за подривна дейност, които са разработвани от древността до днес. Ще видите информация събрана от книги, лекции и документални филми, проследяваща нейната еволюция през годините и нейното влияние днес. Имайте предвид, че макар и тези тактики да са разработвани на изток, тяхната употреба в днешния глобализиран свят най-вероятно е повсеместна и многостранна. Благодаря ви и приятно гледане! Юри Безменов е бивш агент на КГБ, превърнал се в дисидент в САЩ през 80-те години. Занимавал се е с подривна дейност и в серия книги и лекции обяснява как работи тя. Лекциите му се изучават в Щатския университет за специални съвместни операции в Тампа, Флорида. Една от неговите популярни лекции използвам за отправна точка, от която да обясним различните подривни тактики на изтока.
So the greatest mistake or misconception, I think, is that whenever we are talking about KGB, for some strange reason, starting from Hollywood movie makers to professors of political science and quote-unquote experts on Soviet affairs, or Kremlinologists as they call themselves, they think that the most desirable thing for Andropov and the whole KGB is to steal blueprints of some supersonic jet, bring it back to Soviet Union and sell it to the Soviet military-industrial complex. It's only partly true. If we take the whole time, money, and manpower that the Soviet Union and KGB in particular spends outside of USSR border, we will discover, of course there are no official statistics unlike with CIA or FBI, that the espionage as such occupies only 10 to 15% of money, time, and manpower. 15% of the activity of KGB. The rest, 85%, is always subversion. And unlike a dictionary of English, Oxford Dictionary, subversion in Soviet terminology means always a destructive, aggressive activity aimed to destroy the country, nation, or geographical area of your enemy. So there's no romantics in there, absolutely. No blowing up bridges, no microfilms in Coca-Cola cans, nothing of that sort. No James Bond nonsense. It's most of this activity is overt, legitimate, and easily observable if you give yourself time and trouble to observe it. But according to the law and law enforcement systems of the Western civilization, it's not a crime. Exactly because of misconception, manipulation of terms. We think that subverter is a person who is going to blow up our beautiful bridges. No. Subverter is a student who comes for exchange, a diplomat, an actor, an art. First human being who formulated the tactics of subversion was a Chinese philosopher by the name of Sun Tzu. 2500 years BC. He was an advisor for several imperial courts in ancient China. And he said, after long meditation, that to implement state policy in a warlike manner, it's the most counterproductive, barbaric, and inefficient to fight on a battlefield. You know that war is continuation of state policy, right? So if you want successfully to implement your state policy and you start fighting, this is the most idiotic way to do it. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in the country of your enemy, until such time that the perception of reality of your enemy is screwed up to such an extent that he does not perceive you as an enemy, and that your system, your civilization, and your ambitions look to your enemy as an alternative, if not desirable, then at least feasible. Better red than dead. That's the ultimate purpose, the final stage of subversion, after which you can simply take your enemy without a single shot being fired, if the subversion is successful. This is basically what subversion is. As you see, not a single mentioning of blowing up bridges. Of course, Sun Tzu didn't know about blowing up bridges. Maybe there were not that many bridges at that time. But the basics of subversion is being taught to every student of KGB school in USSR and to officers of military academies. I'm not sure if the same author is included in the list of reading for American officers, to say nothing about ordinary students of political science. I had difficulty to find the translation of Sun Tzu in the library of a university in Toronto and later on here in Los Angeles. But it's a book which is not available. It is forced to every student in USSR. Every student who is taught to be dealing further in his future career.
Първият известен автор по темата за разузнаването в древния свят е Сун Цзу, велик пълководец и правителствен чиновник, който живял и водил битки около провинция Жълта река към 500 години преди Христа, много преди възхода на Рим. Като много професионални войници преди и след него, Сун Цзу осъзнавал, че войната е нещо повече от едно сражение. Към края на своята кариера той е написал класическото съчинение Изкуството на войната, Пинг Фа, което поставя силен акцент върху разузнаването. Осъзнавайки, че всеки приличен и добре ръководен враг рядко ще прояви благоволението или любезността да се подчини на желанията му, а може дори да има свои собствени неприятни идеи, Сун Цзу размишлявал задълбочено върху разузнаването и го направил приоритет не само за войници, но и за държавници. Сун Цзу разделя разузнавателните агенти на 5 основни групи. Местни жители, правителствени служители от вражеския лагер, които биха били предали правителството си, за да останат на постовете си, вражески шпиони, които могат да се превербуват и използват за дезинформация, обречени шпиони, които могат да бъдат пожертвани, за да заблудят врага с фалшиви данни, и шпиони, които могат да проникнат при врага, да оцелеят и да предават точни сведения от вражеският лагер. Сун Цзу осъзнавал, че малкото средства, вложени за разузнаване в мирно време, са вид инвестиция, за страховка, че няма да се похарчи многократно повече, ако или когато избухне война. За Сунза доброто разузнаване в мирно време било също толкова важно за националната отбрана, колкото и армия потеглила на война и по-евтино при това. Философията му ясно изтъква колко е важно разузнаването или предварителната осведоменост. Онова, благодарение на което мъдрият владетел и добрият пълководец са способни да нанесат удар на врага, да го сразят и да извършат небивали подвизи, е предварителната осведоменост. Тази осведоменост не може да се постигне чрез допитване до богове и духове, нито да се придобие от предходен опит, нито да се извлече от заключения. Сведения за обстановката при врага могат да ни дадат само други хора, казва Сун Цзъ. Разсъжденията на Сун Цзъ за разузнаването в никакъв случай не били изолирани примери от мъдростта на Ориента.
You see, the tactic of subversion, about which I'm talking, is similar to the martial art, the Japanese martial art. If some of you are familiar with that tactic, probably you will remember that if an enemy is bigger and heavier than yourself, it would be very painful to resist his direct strike. If a heavier person wants to strike me in the face, it would be very naive and counterproductive to stop his blow. The Chinese and Japanese judo art tells us what to do. First to avoid the strike, then to grab the fist and continue his movement in the direction where it was before, right? So, what happens here? The target country obviously does something wrong. If it's a free democratic society, there are many different movements within the society. There are obviously, in every society, there are people who are against this society. They may be simple criminals, ideologically in disagreement with the state policy, conscientious enemies, simply psychotic personalities who are against anything, right? And finally, there are a small group of agents of a foreign nation, bought, subverted, recruited, right? The moment all these movements will be directed in one direction, right? This is the time to catch that movement and to continue it until the movement forces the whole society into collapse, into crisis, right? So that's exactly the martial art tactic. We don't stop an enemy. We let him go. We help him to go in the direction we want them to go. Okay? So, on the stage of demoralization, obviously there are tendencies in each society, in each country, which are going to opposite direction from the basic moral values and principles. At that point, the next step is destabilization. Again, this word says for itself what it is. To destabilize all the relations, all the accepted institutions and organizations in a country of your enemy. How you do it? You don't have to send up a battalion of KGB agents to blow up bridges. No. You let them do it themselves. The area of application is, again, it's narrower now. Not like the previous case. The overt legitimate actions of the KGB in this case would be hardly noticeable. There is no crime if a professor who recently went to USSR introduces a course of Marxism-Leninism in a Californian college, for example. Nobody is going to come to his doorstep and say, okay, mister, come, you are under arrest. No, it's not a crime. It's not even considered a moral crime against your country. So the area of application here is narrowing down to economy, again, labor relations, right? To law and order, plus military. And economy, law and order. Yes, and again the media, but wider scope, little bit different. I'll explain it later. Okay, basically 3 areas. Economy. The radicalization of bargaining process. If on that stage we still could achieve, theoretically, some positive compromise between the negotiating sides with say, arbitrary, introduction of arbitrary judges, third side, objectively judging the demands of both sides. Here it's radicalization. On the stage of destabilization, we cannot come to compromise even within a family. The husband and wife couldn't figure out which is better. Husband wants his kids to eat at the table, and wife wants a child to roam around the room and drop food all over the floor. They cannot come to compromise unless they start a fight. It's impossible to reach a compromise, constructive compromise, between neighbors. Some people say, I don't like you to watering your lawn at that time because exactly at that time I'm walking my dog and he's getting nervous. He cannot pass his bowels, you know. So they cannot compromise. They go to a civil court or something like that. Radicalization of human relations. No more compromise. Fight, fight, fight. The normal, traditionally accepted relations are destabilized. The relations between teachers and students in schools and colleges. Fight. The relations in economical sphere between laborers and employers are further radicalized. No more acceptance of the legitimacy of demands of workers. Unlike Japanese, with the theory Z, if you ever heard about it, where the workers are involved in the decision-making process, therefore they don't have moral incentive to fight their bosses. In the United States, it's just the opposite. The harder is the fight, the better. The more heroic they look. When the Greyhound network was on strike recently, the correspondents of local TV networks all over the United States were approaching the strikers, and they say, oh yes, we are doing something nice. They look like heroes and they were proud. There was some family, the husband was a bus driver. Now they decided in a protest against the bosses to camp somewhere in the forest. And they were presented to the audience as a heroic, nice people. You see? The violent clashes between passengers, picketers, and the strikers are presented as something normal. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would be angry, say, why so much hatred? Today we are not. We say, well, commonplace. Radicalization, militarization sometimes. As I explained on that stage, I took a step a little bit further. Shooting people. Okay, law and order now also is pushed into the area where previously people settled their differences peacefully and legitimately. Now we are getting with this court cases in the smallest irrelevant cases. We cannot solve our problems anymore. The society at large becomes more and more antagonistic between individuals, between groups of individuals, and the society at large. The media puts himself in the opposition to the society in general, at large. Separate, alienated. Okay? On that stage, you remember I was talking a couple of hours ago about the sleepers. That's when the students from, say, United States, if they are trained in Lumumba University, or developing nations, that's the students I was dealing with, are being sent back from the Soviet Union here. Or if they were already in the United States, in the country, which is the object of subversion, they spring to action. The sleepers go up. They slept for 15 to 20 years. Now they become leaders of groups, preachers, I don't know, public figures. Prominently, they actively include themselves in a political process. All of a sudden, we see a homosexual. 15 years ago, he did his dirty job and nobody cared. Now, he makes it a political issue. Political issue. He demands recognition, respect, human rights, and he rallies a large group of people. And there are violent clashes between him and police, his group and ordinary people, no matter what. It's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter where the division line goes. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms, that is destabilization process. The sleepers, many of whom are simply KGB agents, become leaders of the process of destabilization. Doesn't mean that Comrade Andropov sends Comrade Ivanov to the United States. The person who takes care is already here. He is a respected citizen of the United States. Sometimes he gets money from various foundations for his legitimate struggle for, I don't know, human rights, women's rights, kid lib, prison lib, whatever. There are sympathetic Americans who donate their money to him. This stabilization process usually leads directly to the process of crisis. In case of developing nations, that's the area where I was active. The process starts when the legitimate bodies of power, the social structure collapse. It cannot function anymore. So instead, we have artificial body injected into society, such as non-elected committees. You remember I was talking about them here. Social workers who are not elected by people, media who are self-appointed rulers of your opinion, some strange groups which claim that they know how to lead society forward. They don't usually. All they care is how to collect donations and sell their own concocted ideology, mixture of religion and ideology. Here, we have all this artificial body claiming power. If the power is denied to them, they take it by force. In case of Iran, for example, all of a sudden we have revolutionary committees. What kind of revolution? There was no revolution yet, and yet they had the committees. They were taking power of judgment. They had the power of execution, they had the power of legislation, and that they had the power of judicial. All of them combined in one person, who is half-baked intellectual, sometimes graduated from Harvard University or Berkeley. He comes back to his country and he thinks that he knows the answer to all the social, economical problems. Okay? Crisis is when society cannot function anymore productively. It collapses, obviously. That's the word for crisis. So therefore, the population at large is looking for a savior. The religious groups are expecting a Messiah to come. The workers say, we have family to feed. Let's have a strong government, maybe socialist government, centralized. When somebody put the employers on their place and let us work. We are sick and tired of going to strike and missing overtime and all that stuff. We need some strong man, strong government, a leader, a savior is needed. Population is sick and tired already. And here we are. We have a savior. Either a foreign nation comes in, or the local group of leftists, Marxists, no matter what they call themselves, Sandinista, a reverend or some sort, Bishop Muzureva, like in Zimbabwe, doesn't matter. A savior comes and says, I will lead you. So we have two alternatives here. Civil war and invasion. Okay? See how it goes? Civil war, we know what it is. Lebanon is the best example. The civil war, which was artificially implanted in Lebanon by injection of force of PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Invasion we had in many other countries like Afghanistan, name any East European country, it was invaded by the Soviet army. But the result is the same. The next stage is normalization. Normalization is a very ironic word, of course. It is borrowed from 1968 situation in Czechoslovakia, when the Soviet propaganda and after them New York Times declared the country is normalized. The tanks moved into Prague, so there is no more Prague Spring, there is no more violence. Normalization. At that stage, the self-appointed rulers of the society don't need any revolution anymore. They don't need any radicalism anymore. So this is the reverse from destabilization. Basically, it is stabilizing the country by force. So all the sleepers and activists and social workers and liberals and homosexuals and professors and Marxists and Leninists are being eliminated physically sometimes. They've done their job already. Okay? They are not needed anymore. The new rulers need stability to exploit the nation, to exploit the country, to take advantages of the victory. Okay? So no more revolutionaries, please. And that's exactly what happens in a number of countries. You remember Bangladesh? This is the crisis in which I was instrumental. First they had Mujibur Rahman. In 1971, he was the leader of People's Party, Awami League, with mustache like Stalin. He was in Russia many times. In 5 years, he was shot by his former colleagues, Marxists. He fulfilled his function. In Afghanistan, it happened 3 times. First there was Taraki, then there was Amin, now there's Babrak Karmal. They killed each other successively, one after another. The moment he fulfills his duty, the first one demoralized country, the second destabilized, the third one brought it to crisis. Goodbye, comrades. Babrak Karmal comes from Moscow and put into the seat of power. Same thing happened in Grenada recently. Maurice Bishop, Marxist, was killed by Austin, what's his name, General something, who was also a Marxist. Right?
Against this sense that everything's sliding out of control, it's hard to know what to cling to or even what's going on. Here's a personal view from documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis, the man behind The Power of Nightmares and the forthcoming Bitter Lake, on the chaos that seems to be engulfing everything.
So much of the news this year has been hopeless, depressing, and above all, confusing. To which the only response is, oh dear. But what this film is going to suggest is that that defeatist response has become a central part of a new system of political control. And to understand how this is happening, you have to look to Russia, and to a man called Vladislav Surkov, who is a hero of our time. Surkov is one of President Putin's advisors, and has helped him maintain his power for 15 years. But he has done it in a very new way.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
He came originally from the avant-garde art world, and those who have studied his career say that what Surkov has done is import ideas from conceptual art into the very heart of politics. His aim is to undermine people's perception of the world, so they never know what is really happening. Surkov turned Russian politics into a bewildering, constantly changing piece of theatre. He sponsored all kinds of groups, from neo-Nazi skinheads to liberal human rights groups. He even backed parties that were opposed to President Putin. But the key thing was that Surkov then let it be known that this was what he was doing. which meant that no one was sure what was real or fake. As one journalist put it, it's a strategy of power that keeps any opposition constantly confused, a ceaseless shape-shifting that is unstoppable because it's indefinable, which is exactly what Surkov is alleged to have done in the Ukraine this year. In typical fashion, as the war began, Surkov published a short story about something he called non-linear war. A war where you never know what the enemy are really up to, or even who they are. The underlying aim, Surkov says, is not to win the war, but to use the conflict to create a constant state of destabilized perception. In order to manage and control. But maybe we have something similar emerging here in Britain. Everything we're told by journalists and politicians is confusing and contradictory. Of course, there is no Mr. Surkov in charge, but it's an odd, non-linear world that plays into the hands of those in power. British troops have come home from Afghanistan, but nobody seems to know whether it was a victory or whether it was a defeat. Aging disc jockeys are prosecuted for crimes they committed decades ago, while practically no one in the City of London is prosecuted for the endless financial crimes that are being revealed there. In Syria, we are told that President Assad is the evil enemy, but then his enemies turn out to be even more evil than him. So we bomb them, and by doing that, we help keep Assad in power. But the real epicenter of this non-linear world is the economy. And the closest we have to our own shape-shifting, postmodern politician is George Osborne. He tells us proudly that the economy is growing, but at the same time, wages are going down. He says he is cutting the deficit, but then it's revealed that the deficit is going up. But the dark heart of this shape-shifting world is quantitative easing. The government is insisting on taking billions of pounds out of the economy through its austerity programme. Yet at the very same time, it is pumping billions of pounds into the economy through quantitative easing, the equivalent of £24,000 for every family in Britain. But it gets even more confusing, because the Bank of England have admitted that those billions of pounds have not gone where they are supposed to. A vast amount of the money has actually found its way into the hands of the wealthiest 5% in Britain. It has been described as the biggest transfer of wealth to the rich in recent documented history. It could be a huge scandal, comparable to the greedy oligarchs in Russia. A ruthless elite siphoning off billions of public money. But nobody seems to know. It sums up the strange mood of our time, where nothing really makes any coherent sense. We live with a constant vaudeville of contradictory stories that makes it impossible for any real opposition to emerge, because they can't counter it with a coherent narrative of their own. And it means that we as individuals become ever more powerless, unable to challenge anything, because we live in a state of confusion and uncertainty, to which the response is, oh dear. But that's what they want you to say.
Опростявайки до крайност, определям постмодернизма като недоверие към големите разкази, метанаративите. Това недоверие е резултат от прогреса на науките, но също така и този прогрес го предполага. Постмодерното състояние. Доклад за знанието. 1979. Жан-Франсуа Лиотар. Постмодерният свят е свят на симулакруми, където реалността е изместена от хиперреалността, образи и знаци, които се самовъзпроизвеждат без връзка с реалното. Симулация и симулакруми, 1981, Жан Бодриар. Постмодернизмът е отговор на модерността. Когато не можеш да създадеш нещо напълно ново, можеш да цитираш, да рециклираш, да играеш с миналото, с ирония и уважение. Послепис в Името на розата, 1984, Умберто Еко.
Everything is relative, and we in Russia, we could use postmodernity in order to explain to the West that if any truth is relative, so we have our special Russian truth that you need to accept as something that maybe is not your truth,
even if it's not true.
But if the truth is relative, that doesn't mean that the truth doesn't exist. That means that absolute truth, one for all, doesn't exist.
умершего Алистера Кроули минуты молчания. Если есть в зале какие-нибудь зажигалки и спички, вы можете зажечь и минуту помолчать.
О мой Бог! Един Твой исток, един Твой дух, едино Твое изменение. Позволь мне воспеть Твои совершенства перед людьми. В образе шестиконечной звезды, сверкающей сквозь глупые своды, позволь мне объявить о Твоих совершенствах. Ты явился мне как очень старый Бог, достопочтимый Бог, господин времени с острым серпом. Ты явился мне как радостный и довольный Бог, исполненный могущества, король, Отец в самом рассвете сил, с жезлом вселенной, коронованной короной духа. Ты явился мне с мечом и копьем, воинственный Бог в зияющей броне, в сопровождении свиты рыцарей. Ты явился мне как юный и зияющий Бог, Бог музыки и красоты, как юный Бог во всей своей силе, играющий на лире. Ты явился мне как белая пена, как части тела.
Можем да групираме описаните подривни тактики на изтока в 4 големи групи. Първи е Сун Цзъ. Той практикува така наречената война без война. За него победата е продукт на саботаж на стратегията на противника и на саботажа като цяло. Използване и подсилване на противниковите слабости. Заблуда за собствените сили в очите на врага. Осигуряваш си победа, когато се биеш само с врагове, които вече са победени психически. Това са древните корени на източното разбиране за психологическата война. Наследници на тези практики са КГБ. Те ги преобразуват в 4-фазният модел, представен от Юри Безменов. Това е план за подривна дейност, извършена от специално обучени агенти, ползващи и засилващи вече наличните вътрешни конфликти в обществата. Дестабилизация чрез инфилтрация. Впоследствие, Владислав Сурков започва новата фаза на тези тактики, като решава да продължи дестабилизацията, предложена в предния модел, като използва постмодерната траектория. Вече не само се инфилтрират, а директно се финансират и създават опозиционни движения. По този начин се създава силно недоверие към всяка опозиция. Това не се крие, а напротив се съобщава по медиите. С това се цели размиване на границите между реалност и нереалност. Дестабилизация чрез симулация и симулакрум. Появява се концепцията за нелинеарната война, война с флуидни характеристики, без ясни граници и противници. В китайската доктрина през 1999 г. се появява подобна концепция, наречена неограничената война. Последен наследник на тези практики е Александър Дугин. Той продължава работата в насока на засилване на естествените тенденции на постмодернизма, залага на релативизма и объркването, произведено от пренасищането на информация. Медийното влияние. Релативизма позволява според него да се изгради нова и отделна руска версия на истината. Мултимедийната среда, изпълнена с симулакруми, заедно с разпада на големите наративи, позволява да се използва и хаос магията. Магия, освободена от голяма духовна система и фокусирана единствено върху постигане на резултат. За Дугин, политик и идеолог са ефективни само доколкото са добри магиосници. Хаосът, дестабилизацията като начин за пречистване на логоса.